Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The weekend was supposed to be ordinary. Lucy had dropped the news casually, like it was no big deal. "I'm going away with the girls this weekend," she said, her back turned to me as she packed her bag. The kids were already at school, and I was sipping my morning coffee, halfway through the sports section. I didn't look up at first, too engrossed in the latest headlines, but something about the way she said it made me pause. "Which girls?" I asked, keeping my tone light, trying to sound disinterested. "Just the usual crew," she replied, zipping up her suitcase. "You know, Mandy, Sarah, and the others." She flashed me a quick smile, the kind that barely reached her eyes. Then she was gone, off to the bathroom, probably to check her makeup. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Lucy had done these weekend trips before, but it had been a while. We both had busy jobs and the kids kept us grounded most weekends. Still, the way she was rushing, the way her smile didn't seem genuine, it gnawed at me. I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking. After all, she'd never given me a reason to doubt her. Or had she? As she walked back into the room, ready to leave, I watched her closely. She was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Nothing unusual. Yet there was something in the air between us, something unspoken. "Okay, I'm off," she said, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "I'll be back Sunday evening." "Have fun," I said, smiling as naturally as I could. But inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. As I heard the door close behind her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house felt too quiet, too empty. Lucy had texted earlier, saying they'd arrived safely at the cabin. She sent a picture, too, her and the girls, all smiles. It looked like they were having fun, but something about the whole thing didn't sit well with me. I knew Lucy better than anyone, and something in her eyes was off. I grabbed her tablet from the coffee table, where she'd left it earlier that day. I didn't have any intention of snooping, not at first. But as I stared at the screen, my hands moved almost by themselves. I tapped the screen to wake it up, and there it was, her message app, still open. And right at the top, a message from someone named Mark. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. It's going to be wild." The words burned into my brain. I read them over and over, as if they might somehow change. But they didn't. The reality of what I was seeing hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife wasn't on a girls' weekend. She was with him. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Could it be a joke? A misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew the truth. Lucy had been lying to me. For the next few minutes, I just sat there, numb. I felt like my world was collapsing in slow motion. Everything we had built, everything I thought we were, crumbled in front of me. But there was no time to break down. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to be sure. I scrolled through the rest of their messages. It was all there, in black and white. The flirty exchanges, the plans they had made, the hotels they had stayed in. This wasn't some fling. It had been going on for months. And I had been clueless the entire time. Anger bubbled up inside me, mixing with the hurt and betrayal. I wanted to confront her right then, to drive to wherever she was and demand answers. But I knew better. I needed to play this smart. If I went in guns blazing, she'd just deny it, twist the story somehow. I needed proof, something undeniable. I put the tablet down and leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I seen the signs? I thought back to the past few months, the late nights at work, the sudden weekends away, the way she'd been on her phone more often. I'd chalked it up to stress, to work, to anything but infidelity. But now, it all made sense. For the rest of the night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the texts, imagining Lucy with him, laughing, touching, kissing. It made me sick to my stomach. But by the morning, the anger had started to harden into something else, resolve. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to confront her now, not without a plan. No, I needed more than a confrontation. I needed to turn this around, make sure she regretted every moment she'd spent with him. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent the morning installing a tracking app on her phone. I'd done enough research to know that it would run in the background without her noticing. I'd see everywhere she went, every message she sent. I would know everything. For the next few days, I waited, biding my time. When Lucy returned from her trip, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about the kids, told me all about her weekend with the girls. I nodded along, playing my part, pretending I didn't know the truth. But inside, I was fuming. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, and every time she smiled at me, it felt like a slap in the face. Still, I kept my cool. I had to. The tracking app was working perfectly. I knew where she went, who she talked to. I was collecting everything I needed. It wasn't long before she made plans to see him again. Another work meeting, she called it, with that same practiced smile. I watched her leave the house, watched her phone's location move across the map until it stopped at his house. I felt a surge of satisfaction. I had her now. That night, I sat alone in the living room, just like I had the night I discovered the truth. But this time, I wasn't feeling helpless. This time, I had a plan. Lucy thought she was getting away with it, that I was clueless. But she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't going to let her destroy our life, our family, without consequences. I looked at her tablet, sitting innocently on the coffee table, and a cold smile crossed my face. This was only the beginning. The days after Lucy's return were like walking on thin ice. Every word she spoke, every casual gesture felt like a performance, and I was the unwitting audience. But I wasn't unwitting anymore, and the act was wearing thin. I had a front row seat to her lies now, watching as she weaved her way through conversations with ease, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I kept up appearances, pretending to be the same old Mark, the loving, trusting husband. But every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, I felt the bitterness creep deeper into my bones. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had she spent in his arms while I sat at home, oblivious? The anger simmered, but I held it in check. This was all part of the plan. It didn't take long before the next opportunity presented itself. It was a Tuesday night, and Lucy had just finished telling me about a late meeting she had at work the following day. The meeting, of course, was with him, Mark. She didn't even bother to change his name in her messages, which made me wonder how stupid she really thought I was. It was almost insulting. I waited until she was in the shower, her phone left charging on the nightstand. That's when I started laying the groundwork for the next phase. I logged into the tracking app, checking her upcoming plans and confirming the time and location of their next rendezvous. His house, again. I noted the address and started making arrangements. It was all coming together, piece by piece. The next day, Lucy left the house early, dressed sharply for her meeting. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, as she always did, and told me not to wait up for dinner. I smiled, nodded, and wished her good luck, the perfect image of a supportive husband. As soon as the door closed behind her, I got to work. I had the whole day ahead of me, and I knew exactly how to use it. The first stop was the bank, where I opened a new, private account in my name only. I transferred a sizable portion of our joint savings into it, just enough to give me a financial cushion when things hit the fan. She wouldn't notice, at least not right away, and by the time she did, it would be too late. Next, I made a call to a lawyer. I didn't need to file for divorce just yet, but I wanted to know my options. I wanted to be prepared for the fallout. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained the situation, his voice steady and calm. "You've done the right thing by gathering evidence," he said. "It's important to be thorough. Keep everything documented, messages, locations, anything that can prove the affair. When you're ready, we can move forward." I thanked him, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was the first time in weeks that I felt like I had control over something. It was empowering, knowing that I wasn't going to be blindsided again. By early afternoon, I was parked in my car, just a few blocks away from Mark's house. Lucy's phone location showed that she was already there. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the house. I could imagine them inside, laughing, touching, doing God knows what. The thought made my stomach churn, but I swallowed the bile and focused on the plan. I wasn't going to barge in there. I wasn't going to make a scene. That would come later, when I had all the leverage I needed. For now, I just needed confirmation, something undeniable. I had bought a small camera earlier that morning, one designed for surveillance. It wasn't flashy or high-tech, but it would do the job. I adjusted the camera, setting it up inside a small bag that I could easily leave near the house without drawing attention. I walked down the street, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. My hands felt clammy, and my heart was racing, but I kept my cool. I reached the side of Mark's house, where the kitchen window gave a partial view of the inside. I could see shadows moving, the faint sound of laughter floating through the open window. My jaw tightened, but I didn't stop. I quickly placed the camera on the windowsill, hidden behind a potted plant, and hurried back to the car. Now, all I had to do was wait. The hours dragged on, every minute feeling like an eternity. I kept checking the camera feed on my phone, watching as blurry figures moved in and out of view. There wasn't much to see at first, just the occasional glimpse of Lucy or Mark walking through the kitchen, making coffee, chatting. It was almost domestic, the way they moved around each other. It made me sick. Then, just as the sun began to set, I saw it, the moment I had been waiting for. Lucy walked into the kitchen, her hand resting on Mark's shoulder. He turned to face her, his hand sliding around her waist, pulling her closer. They kissed, slow and deliberate, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. My hands clenched into fists as I watched, my knuckles turning white. This was it. The proof I needed. I recorded the footage, saving it to my phone. There was no denying it now. Lucy had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, when she returned home, I was waiting for her. I didn't confront her right away, not yet. Instead, I played along, asking her about her meeting and nodding as she fed me more lies. She looked tired, maybe a little guilty, but not enough to raise any alarms. I let her go to bed without saying a word, but inside, I was burning with anger. I stayed up late, watching the footage over and over, planning my next move. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and everything she had tried to take from me. Lucy thought she had the upper hand, that she could lie and cheat and get away with it. But she had no idea what was coming. The following morning, Lucy left for work, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I watched her go, a cold smile tugging at the corner of my lips. She had no idea that by the end of the week, her entire world would come crashing down. I spent the rest of the day preparing for what came next. I gathered all the evidence I had collected, the messages, the tracking data, the footage from the camera, and organized it into a neat little folder on my laptop. I even printed out a few key pieces, just in case. When it was all done, I sat back and looked at the mountain of evidence in front of me. This wasn't just proof of an affair. This was a weapon, and I was going to use it. I made one final stop before the weekend hit. I drove to a small cafe near Mark's house and sat down at a corner table. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lucy's number. She picked up after the first ring, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hey, honey. What's up?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Hey, babe. I was just thinking, how about a weekend getaway? Just the two of us. We haven't had much time together lately, and I thought it might be nice." There was a pause on the other end, but only for a second. "That sounds amazing. When were you thinking?" I glanced at the clock. "Tomorrow. I'll book us a cabin upstate. You won't have to worry about a thing." She laughed softly, her voice warm and affectionate. "You're the best, Mark. I'll pack tonight." As I hung up the phone, my smile faded. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end, and Lucy had no idea just how far I was willing to go. Tomorrow, everything would change. Friday morning arrived with the crispness of autumn settling in, and Lucy was in an unusually good mood. She moved around the house humming to herself, a tune that grated at my nerves more than it should have. She was excited about the weekend, thrilled at the prospect of our getaway. I watched her pack with a cool detachment, knowing this was likely the last time I'd see her like this, carefree, oblivious to the trap I had set. She turned to me, her face glowing. "Do you think I should pack the red dress, or is this more of a casual trip?" I forced a smile, the same smile I'd been perfecting for weeks. "Let's keep it casual. It's just a quiet cabin, right? Something comfortable." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and folded a sweater into her bag. I couldn't help but marvel at how smoothly she lied to me, how easily she pretended to be the loving wife while sneaking around with him. The irony of her asking me for packing advice wasn't lost on me. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes, she said, her back turned to me as she zipped up her suitcase. "I'm so excited, Mark. This is exactly what we need." I nodded, barely able to contain the bitterness rising in my throat. "Yeah. It's going to be unforgettable." Once the kids were off to my parents' house for the weekend, we hit the road. Lucy sat in the passenger seat, chatting away about the weekend, the kids, her plans for work, all of it meaningless noise to me. I responded when necessary, careful to keep my tone light and engaged, but inside, I was counting down the hours until everything fell apart. We drove for about 2 hours before we arrived at the cabin. It was the perfect setting, secluded, peaceful, far from the prying eyes of neighbors. A place where we could be alone with nothing but the woods surrounding us. Lucy seemed thrilled as we pulled up the gravel driveway, taking in the rustic charm of the cabin. "This is perfect," she exclaimed, stepping out of the car and breathing in the crisp air. "You really outdid yourself, Mark." I gave a modest shrug, playing the part. "Just wanted to give us some time away from everything." The cabin was cozy enough, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and large windows overlooking the forest. We unpacked quickly, and I couldn't help but notice how relaxed Lucy seemed. She was in her element, completely unaware that this weekend wasn't about rekindling anything. It was about ending it all. As the afternoon wore on, we settled into a routine. I let her relax, giving her space to enjoy the cabin while I made subtle preparations. I made sure the camera I'd set up earlier was positioned perfectly in the living room, capturing every moment. It was hidden well, concealed behind a bookshelf, just out of sight. She wouldn't even think to look for it. By evening, we were sitting by the fireplace, a glass of wine in each of our hands. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Lucy leaned back in her chair, her legs tucked beneath her, completely at ease. It almost felt normal, like any other weekend we might have spent together. But the weight of what I knew pressed down on me, making it impossible to enjoy the moment. "This is nice," she said, her voice soft. "I've missed this, just the two of us." I smiled again, the same fake smile I'd been wearing for days. "Yeah. Me too. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I know I've been distant lately. Work's been crazy, and I haven't been the best wife. But I'm going to change that. I promise. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But I had seen the messages, the photos, the stolen moments between her and Mark. Her promises meant nothing now. I'm glad to hear that, I said, my voice steady. But there's something we need to talk about. She looked at me, a slight frown creasing her forehead. What's wrong? I set my glass down, the firelight reflecting in her wide blue eyes. Lucy, I know about Mark. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Her smile faltered, and for a split second, I saw the panic in her eyes. She tried to hide it, tried to regain her composure, but it was too late. The truth was out, and she knew it. Mark, she said, her voice wavering slightly. What are you talking about? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my gaze never leaving hers. I know everything, Lucy. The texts. The trips. Him. She stared at me, her face pale, the wine glass trembling in her hand. For a moment, she said nothing, her mind racing as she tried to piece together how I could possibly know. Then, slowly, she set her glass down and sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough, I replied coldly. Long enough to see what you've been doing behind my back, long enough to know how you've been lying to me for months. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had spent too many sleepless nights wondering what I had done wrong, wondering if I was losing my mind. And now, as she sat across from me, her guilt written all over her face, I felt nothing but anger. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Of course you didn't. It's never intentional, is it? It's always a mistake. But it wasn't just one mistake, was it, Lucy? This has been going on for months. You chose this. She wiped at her tears, but they kept coming. I love you, Mark. I never stopped loving you. Don't, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't sit there and tell me you love me. People who love each other don't do what you did. She bit her lip, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to find the right words. But there were no words that could fix this, no apology that could erase the betrayal. I was lonely, she said finally, her voice trembling. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Mark he was just there. It wasn't serious. It was never serious. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. The fire crackled behind me as I paced the room, the anger bubbling to the surface again. Not serious. I spat. So that makes it okay. Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've thrown away? She sobbed, her hands covering her face. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, Mark, don't give up on us. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. I'll end it with him. I already planned to. I stopped pacing and turned to face her, my chest heaving with the effort to keep my voice steady. You don't get to decide that now. It's too late, Lucy. You made your choice. Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking with the force of it. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly drowned by the betrayal that still burned inside me. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it all away. I walked over to the bookshelf, where I had hidden the camera. I picked it up, the small device feeling heavier than it should have. I held it out to her, watching as confusion crossed her tear-streaked face. What's that? She asked, her voice hoarse. It's proof, I said flatly. Proof of everything. I've been recording you, Lucy. I've seen it all. Her eyes widened in horror as the realization hit her. You recorded me? I nodded. I wasn't going to take your word for it. I needed proof. And now I have it. She sat there, stunned into silence, her eyes locked on the camera in my hand. The weight of her actions, of everything she had done, seemed to crash down on her all at once. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said quietly, setting the camera down on the table between us. When we get back from this trip, I'm filing for divorce. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. Please, Mark, don't do this. We can work it out. I'll do anything, just don't leave me. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the love I once had. All I saw was someone who had betrayed me, who had taken our life and twisted it into something unrecognizable. I'm sorry, Lucy, I said, my voice cold. But we're done. Her sobs echoed through the cabin, but I turned my back on her, walking away from the fireplace and into the darkened hallway. There was nothing left to say. The night stretched on, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. I lay awake in the cold silence of the cabin, the sounds of her quiet sobs filtering through the walls. The woman I had once loved was just a stranger now, a stranger who had broken something inside me that could never be fixed. Tomorrow, I would leave her behind. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the cabin, casting soft rays across the bed where Lucy lay, curled up under the covers. Her breathing was steady, but the tension between us had settled like a fog over the room. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing with everything that had unfolded the night before. My decision had been made, I was leaving her, no turning back. I had the proof I needed, the closure I thought I'd wanted. All that was left was to follow through. I quietly packed my bag, careful not to wake her. She looked peaceful in her sleep, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of sadness struck me. This was the woman I'd shared my life with for years, the mother of my children. But that same woman had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Any sadness I felt was quickly overtaken by the sharp sting of betrayal. By the time I zipped up my suitcase and set it by the door, Lucy stirred. She blinked a few times, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. When she saw me standing there, fully dressed with my bag packed, her face fell. Mark, please, she whispered, her voice hoarse from sobbing. Let's talk. We can still fix this. I shook my head, my heart hardened. There's nothing left to fix, Lucy. I made my decision. Tears welled up in her eyes again as she sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll never speak to him again. Please don't leave me. I felt my chest tighten, but I refused to let her words sway me. I couldn't. It's too late, I said firmly. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I reached for the handle of the door, ready to leave her and this chapter of my life behind. But just as my fingers wrapped around the cold metal, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob, confused. Who could possibly be here? We were in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. Lucy's eyes widened in alarm, and I could see the fear flicker across her face. The knock came again, louder this time. Reluctantly, I pulled open the door. What I saw on the other side sent a jolt of shock through me. Standing there was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp features. He looked vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him right away. His eyes flickered between me and Lucy, and for a moment, I saw something dark flash in his expression. But what caught me off guard the most was the suitcase in his hand, nearly identical to mine. Mark, the man said, his voice low and steady. It was in that instant that everything clicked. This was Mark, him, the man she had been seeing behind my back. The man she had chosen over me. I stepped back instinctively, my mind struggling to process the situation. Why was he here? How did he even know where we were? Before I could say anything, Lucy sprang from the bed, her face pale and panic-stricken. What are you doing here?" she stammered, clutching the blanket tighter around herself. Mark stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes now locked on Lucy. "You didn't think I'd just let you run off for a cozy weekend with him, did you?" His voice was cold, sharp, like a knife slicing through the air. My mind was spinning. What the hell was going on? "What is this?" I demanded, stepping between them, anger bubbling up inside me. "Why are you here?" Mark's eyes flickered to me for a moment, a cruel smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm here because Lucy and I have unfinished business." "Isn't that right, Lucy?" She shook her head frantically, her voice trembling. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to be here." Mark took another step forward, his gaze narrowing. "Oh, but I am. And now it's time we settle this." Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the man I had expected to confront. He wasn't just some office fling. There was something darker, something dangerous in his presence that made me feel like I had walked into a trap. I turned to Lucy, my voice sharp. "What's going on, Lucy? Why is he here?" She didn't answer. Her eyes darted between us, filled with panic. Then, in a small voice, she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Mark let out a dark laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, Lucy. You've always been so good at playing both sides, haven't you?" I stepped closer to him, my anger boiling over. "I don't know what the hell is going on, but you need to leave. Now." But Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he looked directly at me, his expression cold and calculating. "You think you're the only one she's been lying to, don't you?" The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. "Mark, please." Mark ignored her, his gaze never leaving mine. "You weren't supposed to know about me. And I wasn't supposed to know about you." The room spun, and for a moment, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. What the hell was he saying? "I've been seeing Lucy for over a year," Mark continued, his tone almost casual, like we were discussing the weather. "But I didn't know she was stringing you along, too. I thought she had left you months ago." I stared at Lucy, disbelief flooding my mind. "You told him we were separated?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose either of you." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "Well, now you've lost us both." The air in the cabin was suffocating. I could barely breathe. Lucy had been playing us both, weaving lies between the two of us, all while pretending to hold our lives in her hands. I had been so focused on exposing her affair that I hadn't realized the depth of her deception. "You're pathetic," Mark spat, his anger rising. "You thought you could keep this going forever? Thought you could string us along while you figured out what you wanted?" Lucy crumpled onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to turn out like this." I stood there, numb, watching her fall apart. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was a stranger to me now. Mark shook his head in disgust. "I'm done with this. Done with you." He turned and headed for the door, his suitcase in hand. As he passed me, he muttered, "You can have her. She's not worth the trouble." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my life. Lucy's sobs filled the cabin, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. She had broken us both, and now, all that remained were the shattered pieces. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. "Goodbye, Lucy." Her voice trembled as she called after me, "Mark, please, don't leave." But I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I felt nothing but emptiness. The surprise wasn't that she had cheated. The surprise was how deep the betrayal had gone, how much of our life had been a lie. I walked away, knowing there was no coming back from this. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free.